Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we are going to be reading True Scary Military Stories. I hope you enjoy them. So, now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true scary stories. When I was 8, we moved to a military housing adjacent to the big base. I was a weird child and spent a lot of time in my tree reading if I wasn't out with the local hooligans playing in boxes like overgrown cats. There was a pomegranate bush in our backyard, so I would eat one while lounging on a thick branch with an R.L. Stine novel. I kept noticing this guy walking back and forth on multiple occasions, but who was I to judge what an adult does? I was home alone one day, so I stayed in my backyard while reading in the shade of an overgrown bush, but still visible to passers-by. That same guy was looking around our backyard that faced tennis courts and open desert wilderness. He starts casually trying to lift the gate hatch, so I ran inside and locked the doors. I told my parents later on, and they listened but thought I was being dramatic. About a week later, I was at my friend's house with 3 other girls. We were in bathing suits playing in hose water in a mini pool, trying to find relief from the sweltering heat. My friend's house faced a large park, and one of them noticed this guy watching us. Someone went in to tell their parents, but the guy must have noticed us all, going from wild animals to a small circle with little animation. My friend's mother was from Korea and ran out with a wooden spoon, yelling in rage Korean. She chased after the already retreating lurker but gave up, locked us inside and called the base police. I told them about the lurker, but I couldn't be sure it was the same one. The mother noticed he had a camera with him. It was the 90s. We ate Keebler cookies, vanilla with fudge in the middle, while her mother sobbed to the police. Trafficking is a more tangible fear for some than others. Base police called my parents, and they finally took me seriously. The house was searched, which I thought was just normal protocol. I was heavily monitored by them and not able to do much without my mother in arm's reach. One day, about a week or so later, we were eating lunch at a fast food place and I recognized the guy. I tell my dad, and he asked me if I was sure, and when I confirmed, he lunged at the guy and threw him back in his chair. Base cops came and looked through his camera to find pictures of me with my friends and at recess. He was arrested immediately. The weirdest part about it, he had broken into our house and made some rat's nest, I assume, of my things in his room. They found everything from baby pictures to clothing. Worst part about it, there were no charges, because my dad was about to retire and get a big job in Michigan. He was also high-ranking, which probably had nothing to do with it. When talking to my mom about it years later, she told me he had accessed our attic and cut through the AC vent to watch me through it. That would explain why my room was always hot, but now I wonder if she's the one being dramatic. And yes, this story is true to the best of my recollection. This happened to my dad back when he was stationed at Offutt Air Base in Nebraska in the early 80s. He lived in the dorm not that far from a guy named John, a radar tech who was the same age as him. Dad never really talked to him, but had seen him around. Said he was no one special, didn't particularly stand out to him, just another young guy like himself. Then in January of 1984, there was a lot of activity in the dorm with John, and my dad saw him leaving with the authorities. Didn't take long to learn why. John had murdered 3 people, 1 while living in Maine, 2 while stationed in Nebraska. Other names for the man, John Jobert, are the Nebraska Boy Snatcher and the Woodford Slasher. Turns out, he was a screwed up guy for a while, having first stabbed someone when he was 13, and attacked several others before he first killed. Yet he got in the military at the same time as my dad. Goes to show how ordinary everyone seems when you don't truly know the people working around you. More than 10 years ago, I had to take a semester off school because I, a 35-year-old male, owed the university housing department money from the previous year, and I couldn't afford to pay that atop my regular tuition. My summer job had come to an end, and I needed to find something quick to start saving up so that I could return to school in the winter. Fortunately, my friend's dad had an opening at the shipping warehouse that he worked in, and he offered me the job, understanding it would only be for just a few months. It was a pretty easy gig, and I was doing pretty well at it. Enough so that the direct management team had started trying to convince me to stick around part-time, even after I went back to school. I was considering it too, until my supervisor quit and was soon replaced by a guy that we'll call Jake. Jake seemed like a pretty friendly and outgoing guy. He was quite a bit larger than me, but he seemed like a pretty gentle person at first. He had just left the military and seemed excited to be back home with his wife and 2 kids. He took a liking to me too, and was constantly praising my work ethic. Then things started to get weird. One day, Jake seemed stressed out and said his kids had been acting up at home. I wasn't a parent yet myself, so I asked him what was up and just generally how he dealt with that. He joked and said something like, "The best way is just to kill the oldest one and keep their skull on your desk. That way, whenever the younger siblings act up, you can point to the skull and remind them to get back in line." He said it in such a tongue-in-cheek, obviously joking kind of way, but it sent shivers down my spine. I tried telling myself that he just had a dark sense of humor, but I never looked at him the same way after that. A week or so later, he invited a bunch of us over to his house for dinner after work. I wasn't super keen on attending, but I felt pressured into going, so I tagged along with a coworker. While there, Jake, who I'd learned wasn't just ex-military, but apparently was in one of the special forces of some branch or another, showed off his collection of knives, noting that one had a notch in the tip, from where the knife had broken when he stabbed an enemy combatant with it. At work, Jake started bringing in a USB drive full of pictures of his confirmed kills from his time in the military, and he'd show them to anyone and everyone who seemed interested. I flat out refused to look at them, but many of my coworkers seemed interested, which left me feeling like I definitely didn't want to be there much longer, and also like I couldn't go to HR and be the one guy who snitched on Jake. Honestly, I was young, stupid, but also scared of what he might do. I quit not long afterward, however, and I briefly mentioned to my friend's dad as I left that Jake was one of the factors that led to my decision. A few weeks later, I learned that Jake had been terminated and escorted off the premises by police when, after a local shopping mall had experienced a shooting that garnered national attention, he joked about recreating the event right there at the warehouse. This isn't about me, but my dad and I together. When I was in kindergarten, my dad was deployed to Iraq for a year. He was sitting around a lot and got through 3 seasons of Lost in that time, but every once in a while he would have to fly a combat mission. Because I was so young, I was scared to walk into the school for the first month or so. I didn't want to leave my mom. To help the fear of school, my school counselor gave me a sheet that, if I was brave enough to go to school, she would mark the piece of paper with an X. If I had enough X's, I got a piece of candy. After this fear subsided and I was walking into school normally, my mom mailed the sheets to my dad to show how far I had come. My dad kept these by his bed, so every day he had to go and fly a combat mission, he would think, if my 5-year-old son is brave enough to go to school, I'm brave enough to fly a helicopter. It gave him confidence and led him on. It was a scary time for all of us, but we got through it. We laugh about it today. In 2007 to 2008, I was deployed to Balad Airfield. For those who were deployed to Iraq, you probably thought of it as a vacation spot for most of the other bases. The base would always get indirect fire every day, but they had the worst aim. My job at the base was to watch what they called the raid camera, which would look out 4,000 feet in 4 cameras facing north, south, east, and west. My job was to catch people placing IEDs or anything that looked suspicious around our base. I was Army, but our captain was Air Force. I don't know why it was like that. I was a private first class at the time and was just following orders. Captain Jackson, will never forget his name, so much wanted to catch someone, and on my shift he found his vehicle that he thought placed an IED. Long story short, he saw it. I didn't. But I didn't speak up because of rank, and found out we killed a family of 4. I had 2 kids of my own right now, and sometimes I can't sleep at night because I'm alive, and that family is not. If only I was more strict with my captain and told him no. Sir, I didn't see what you saw. No, you're wrong. No, I did not have PID. I hate it every time. Around the anniversary when it happened. I hate it that he got a slap on the wrist. I hate that it was just okay. My dad related this story to me when he was quite old. Never said an awful lot about his World War II days. He was on the beach at Dunkirk for 4 days. Didn't like the Stukas, unsurprisingly. On one of the days, him and a buddy were told to take a truck and go to pick up some wounded from a barn away back from the beach. They had a Bren gun carrier with them. They got there safely, although he did say that they could see German tanks in the fields on the way. As they were loading the troops, a German armored car and a motorbike plus sidecar with a machine gun mounted on it came into the farmyard. First shot from the armored car took out the Bren gun. Truck took off with the armored car chasing it and machine gunning the guys in the back. My dad was in the front passenger seat with someone sitting on his lap. That dude got a bullet in the head and was killed outright. The road they were on had high hedges and they couldn't get off it. Eventually, they came to a gate and the driver crashed through it, straight into the middle of a squad of German tanks. Luckily, the crews were outside of them cooking a meal, drove straight past them to a canal at the edge of the field and jumped into it. Dad and his buddy spent the next 8 hours up to their necks in the water hiding from the searching Germans, and eventually made it back to the beach. Lucky man. Survived North Africa and Monte Cassino afterwards. Didn't have a lot to say about that, apart from the MC being hell on earth. I've told so many stories about the Vietnam War, PTSD, the loony bin at the VA hospital. So many things I regret. I got a full measure out of that war. Never was hurt much, but I was messed up. So be it. I wouldn't have it any other way. Can't even imagine myself otherwise. I really can't. And here's why. In 1966, when I was 18, I enlisted in the United States Army. You see, there was a draft, and I didn't particularly want to go to college right away. Plus, I was curious about war. I mean, I could have gone to college and gotten a deferment, but it would only be a deferment until I graduated. So, might as well just get it over with. After college, who knew? I could have business opportunities, maybe a girlfriend, maybe even a kid. Now was the best time. All the young men my age expected to be drafted sooner or later. That's just the way it was. This was before the draft became disputable. Selective service had been hosing up young men since 1942. During World War II, the draft was universal, mostly. Afterwards, the draft just became part of the weather a young man sailed through on his way to becoming an adult. Even Elvis did his bit. Muhammad Ali's simple defiance of the right of the United States of America to draft him was still a year or so in the future. Which is not to say there wasn't defiance of the draft before 1967, but it was quiet. and confined to certain select and privileged scions of wealth. What happened was that when 1946 rolled around and the immediate danger to the nation came to a satisfactory conclusion, things lightened up. Selective service didn't need everybody, so they started making exceptions. Students were allowed to delay the draft. Medical excuses, what used to be called 4F, were no longer shameful. If you knew a cooperative doctor, it was easy for the doc to diagnose a condition that made one unfit for service. High blood pressure, bone spurs, bad heart, bum leg, whatever. Very little stigma involved, though someone had to play the doctor. But still, a physical disability on your permanent record, that wouldn't do much for the career of those fortunate sons. Other options were needed, and for the sons of the wealthy and influential, those options appeared. There were cushy jobs in the Army Reserve or National Guard, where you could play at being military without any risk of being sent overseas. You had to know someone, or rather, Dad had to know someone with a little pull, someone high in the reserves or National Guard. Fortunate sons of the rich and influential were quietly being excused from military service by becoming weekend warriors in a reserve or National Guard slot that required only a few days a month of his time. And if the lucky boy was too busy with frat parties and campus hijinks, well, no one was taking attendance. I guess I was a fortunate son. I certainly thought so. My dad had been in the Signal Corps, then the Air Force, for over 30 years. He retired as a full bird colonel. He knew lots of people with influence, but there was no way he helped me dodge the draft. I would have never dreamed of asking. I could have just skated by on a deferment. Dad would have seen the wisdom of that. I had no idea there would be a draft lottery 4 years later, about the time I would have graduated and become re-eligible for the draft. No inkling that such a thing was even possible. Instead, I did my time. 3 years in the Army, 18 months of it in Vietnam. I saw some stuff that I can't unsee. I went through some major changes, and I didn't come home as the same person. I got back in the fall of 1969, went straight from the jungle to a dorm room at CU Boulder in about 3 or 4 days. I was staggering around campus trying to get oriented, and then on December 1st, they did the first draft lottery. The one for draft-eligible men born from 1944 to 1950. That would have been me. My number was 359. I would have never been drafted. Never. I could have just gone to school. I had already been accepted at a couple of colleges when I enlisted, gotten a 2S deferment, and then the 1969 lottery would have given me a pass. Not my fault. Not me draft dodging. Not me heading for Canada or popping my eardrum. Not me shaming my family, disappointing my father and myself. Just the luck of the draw. It was unsettling, seeing that now meaningless number applied to me. It turns out that I could have skipped all of the last 3 years. Seemed funny at first, kind of hurt my head just to think about it, and that made me laugh too. Weird. Here I am, 3 years late getting my college degree, older than dirt compared to my student contemporaries, and a campus villain to boot. Some enlightened guy who forgot that war is not healthy for children and other living things. So that should be the end of the story, right? Oh, the irony. Joke's on me. I couldn't let go of it. I wasn't thinking, if only I had done that. If only I could go back in time and decide to just go to school. It didn't feel that way. It felt like I had already done that. Had gone to school and missed the war, drawn a pass in the lottery, no dishonor, and gone off to law school or something. 359. I felt odd, like I was remembering something from an unknown dimension of my memory, a life I never had. That lottery number just haunted me, and not in a good way. 359, and everything in the last 3 years just goes poof and disappears. Made me queasy. Seemed like I could have cheated something important. Because I didn't know that boy who skated the draft, went to school, and lucked out on his draft number. I didn't like him. Didn't like his life and didn't want to be him. And I'm not sure why, but I'm pretty sure of that. I don't care how lucky he was. He dodged service to his country. I didn't know that was important until I did my service. I didn't feel like I had missed that other life in an alternate universe. I felt like I had already lived it, and it was for some reason a dishonorable, meaningless life. Maybe so. Me? I felt like I had somehow escaped back to 1966, and this time I had done the right thing. You gotta ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? I didn't have regrets. Just the opposite. I felt like I had dodged something awful. That alternative timeline whistled past my ear like a stray 12.7 millimeter round. It felt like a threat. Felt like a failure. Kinda surreal, you know? 359. That was supposed to be my lucky number, I guess. I should feel like I threw away the winning lottery ticket. For some reason, I don't feel that way at all. No. Go ahead and pull the trigger. Dirty Harry, I do feel lucky. I feel like a fortunate son. So right at the onset of Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, our unit was one of the first ones deployed. I was in the United States Marine Corps. After spending a night at the Mogadishu airport, we moved into the back of the embassy and started setting up firing holes, etc. Because that area had been abandoned for so long, except for the Somalis using it as a graveyard, there was tons of trash, critters, etc. there. A couple of us were rinsing off while standing on a large pallet when a big, ugly 4-inch centipede bit me on the ankle of my right leg. Within a minute or two, my leg was paralyzed, and 2 buddies had to carry me to the aid station. The doctor had nothing to treat it, so he said I could either wait to see what happens or head back to my area and wait. We decided to wait, and after watching a red streak move up my leg and then subside, I could walk again. It was fortunately not as bad as it could have been, but I was curious what other critters anybody else has been bitten by. It was a cool and wet December day off the coast of North Carolina at Camp Lejeune in December of 1982. I had just gotten out of trouble for saying lewd things to a chief. I had gotten from being on the coxswain of an 80-ton Mike boat hauling marine tanks to the beach, back to running the deck of an LCU that carried 3 tanks. Minus my E4 Chevron, the skipper busted me to an E3. I was at the back of the boat on the controls of an anchor we dropped to help pull the 350-ton landing craft off the beach when it all started. I could not see, but I knew something was wrong by the way the boat's stern was wanting to pull towards the beach. I had been here once or twice. Before I got the order, I started to bring in the cable which was attached to the anchor. You really did not want that 2-inch cable getting caught in either the screw or the shaft. Still, we kept swinging towards the churning surf. We were going to broach sideways on the beach, and there was no stopping it. At the time, we had loaded 2 trucks and 2 artillery pieces before we started to broach. After we secured the anchor and as I got near the front of the boat, I felt the first shudder as the boat started bouncing on the sand. Then there was a loud bang, and the boat shimmied as waves picked up the 10-ton ramp and dropped it. Everyone on the boat felt it. I rushed forward, only to find the ramp winch had stopped working. It was not responding to the controls. I opened the hatch to the compartment where the winch was, and it was obvious what had happened. The smell told me the winch had burnt out. It had to be hand-cranked to bring it up. 100 revolutions to raise it 1 inch, and it had to come up almost 15 feet. As the boat bounced in the sand, it started to get off the beach. The craftsmaster did a good job getting the craft turned. Unfortunately, when he turned into the waves, the inoperable ramp started causing problems. It was possible we could lose it. The waves would pick up all 10 tons of it, then let it slam down hard over and over. It seemed the ocean got rougher each passing minute, and Davy Jones wanted that ramp. The vehicles had not yet been secured, so there was no choice in turning around and getting them off the boat. It had to be done. The craftmaster timed it well and buried that ramp in the sand as the waves lifted it. Then the trucks were able to disembark. That's when the real trouble started. As the boat turned to get off the beach again, a series of huge waves hit us, pushing us sideways, leading us to sitting on the sand. High, but far from dry. We were stuck. Good for the ramp, bad for the boat. The waves kept pounding into the port side of the boat, causing all 350 tons to rock in the turf. It got to the point where we were going to need help getting off the beach. The amphibious CB unit had a 30-ton bulldozer there. They tried to push us off the beach to no avail. After a half hour, it was decided to get another boat to attach a tow line and pull us off. The tide was going out and time was short. It was a simple job. Put on a life jacket, then have 2 lines tied to me so I could go outside the stern gate to attach a 30-pound shackle to the tow line. Typical Boss Wayne's mate stuff. Most everyone in my rate had done something like that before. You just embrace the suck, do your job, and move on to the next one when you're a deck ape. We got off the beach. The other LCU pulled us off and had us floating in minutes. Was only one problem. We were informed over the radio that we had a huge hole in our starboard aft quarter. The bulldozer driver never told us that he tore open our boat. Being the crap bird at the time and most everyone else concerned with the ramp, it was up to me to find out how bad it was. I dropped down the scuttle into a small compartment between the engine room and the aft spaces where I opened the hatch. I knew immediately it was pretty bad. When I opened the hatch, the water pressure behind it forcefully pushed the hatch open, allowing the water to pin me against the bulkhead below the surface. I may have peed myself at that point, not really sure. It could have been the adrenaline coursing through me as I was temporarily trapped underwater in a flooded compartment. In seconds that seemed like minutes, the pressure subsided, and I was able to enter the compartment that was only 4 to 5 feet in height. It was very bad. A 5-foot long by 3-foot high opening in after steering. Half of it below the waterline. I waved at the other boats through the hole, even swam out of the hole to see the damage from that view. By the time I got back on deck by climbing up the side of the boat, we had other reports of water leaking into compartments forward. After searching the entire starboard side, we found 5 to 6 other small holes, which were easily fixed with wooden conical-shaped damage control plugs. Just pound them in with a sledgehammer and it'll stop the leak. Then we had to focus on the large hole. No way the parts and equipment we needed was going in the small hatch. All the wood, metal braces, and other equipment had to come through the hole from the outside with the help of another boat. 2 of us went down to repair the boat. Once we had everything we needed, they closed the hatch behind us and we did what sailors have done since people went to sea. We fixed the hole. That was a major feeling, hearing that hatch close behind you as you entered a flooded compartment. We were trained for this though. After beating the jagged steel mostly flat with a sledgehammer, then putting up one section of wood over the hole, we started jamming mattresses and blankets around the edges. After a second layer over that, braced to wherever we could, the 2 of us stopped enough water for the pumps to keep up. Problem solved? No. Just as we got back to within 300 yards of the ship, our engines started to sputter and then they died. We found out later that water went up the air vent to the fuel tank due to lack of preventative maintenance long before I got there. The ship managed to get lines on us and pull us into the well deck. It was a rough entrance. With no control, the rolling waves had their way with the boat, sending us crashing into the batter boards inside the well deck. It was the fastest I ever saw a ship's deck go from flooded to dry during my 3 years at Assaultcraft Unit 2. After seeing the boat dry, we did a pretty good job of fixing her. Just like they taught us, I was going to get put in for an NAM, which was amusing. Go from captain's mast to getting a Naval Achievement Medal in just over 4 weeks. Plus, I had just re-enlisted a few months prior to my interaction with the chief. We worked all night repairing the boat with the professional help of the ship's company on LPD-1, USS Raleigh. Had to drain our fuel tanks and refill, but we were ready to get underway for operations before sunrise. Then the next morning came, and the previous day was forgotten. It only gets worse from there. The next day started off as the previous one. It was cold, wet, coastal North Carolina December morning. We were all tired from working all night, repairing the boat from the previous day's adventures. As the senior chief said, it was a great Navy day. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did I. If I had, there is no doubt that I would have swam ashore than run for the hills. We had been sent to a different ship to pick up 3 M60 tanks, then proceed to the beach. We married up to the back of an LST, a tank landing ship to load, the type that can actually land on the beach itself and unload once it extends its ramp. It was not too bad out on the water, rolling 4-foot seas. That made it tougher to load, but we had done it in far worse conditions. It was timing. Move the tank when the ship is in the trough of the wave. We got him on board for the short ride to the beach. The craftmaster already told me that an engineman would be on the anchor. He wanted me to ramp controls to show the new seaman once again how to lower the ramp and bring it back up. Quite often, when a boat hits the beach, sand will build up on the ramp. You must wash that sand off by lowering it as the boat turns, or else the winch can burn out as it did the day before. Everything was going as it should when we approached the beach. I had cracked the ramp open just enough for me to see over top of it without the waves causing it to move. There were a lot of sandbars off the coast there. Our flat-bottomed boats usually scoot right over them. This one was big enough to slow us down more than usual. It felt like we hit the beach. Seconds later, we did. To go back a few hours, around midnight, a flight surgeon wanted a ride to the beach. He had never ridden a landing craft. No problem. High tide came close to the first aid station, so they moved it to within 50 yards of where we landed. Not counting the 2 new people, we were an experienced crew trained to handle any situation. It was cloudy but clear enough for air ops. The driver of the first tank was a cherry straight out of tank school. He thought we had indeed touched down and released his brakes after being told to keep them on until myself or another seaman said otherwise. This next part kinda sucks, especially for me. If you're squeamish, stop here. You know what is coming. The worst part, I remember every second. After we crossed over the sandbar, a wave picked up that 350-ton boat loaded with 150 tons of tanks and pitched us onto the beach. Hard. The tank driver thought we were already on the beach, so when he started to roll, he tried to hit his brakes, but only stopped one tread. That made the tank pivot and pin me against the hatch that led to the ramp winch. I say pin me, but I had no idea at the time that in reality it crushed me. At first, I didn't know what happened. I couldn't move. Looking over at the seaman I was training, I saw the look of horror on his face. I heard the craftmaster scream, "Move that tank." That is when I looked over my shoulder and saw the tank. Dang, is all I could get out as the tank started to reverse. The seaman grabbed me and sort of peeled me off the tank. I was stuck to the tread. He got me down on the deck and the crew had all of our medical supplies out before the flight surgeon got to me. I knew it was bad. Oh man. Oh crap, oh man was what I heard from my shipmates. Still, they knew what to do. At one point, I thought I had died. A specter dressed in black climbed over the side of the boat and approached me. I swear, I thought it was death coming for me. Turns out, it was a Navy SEAL corpsman who was in a Zodiac boat nearby. He heard it over the radio and came to render assistance. Between the corpsman and the doctor, they put the torn chunks of flesh back in place and got me into a Stokes stretcher, the one with a life jacket at one end. Somehow I ended up with my feet at the life jacket end. This became important to me later. As they loaded me onto the very tank that crushed me, I saw all that blood on deck and knew that my chances were not good. I remember leaving the boat and being put into a shidduch and whisked away as several corpsmen from the aid station jumped in. As we were flying, I was face down and could see out of the open door as we cruised over swampland. All I could think of was if this bird crashes, I'm going to float upside down and drown. That actually scared me. I tried my best to tell them, but I couldn't talk. It was getting hard to breathe, much less speak. They got me to the hospital quickly. Turns out, the Hilo Pliant flew dust-off missions in Vietnam. His job then was medical evacuation. Buddy said he made that Chinook do things it was not supposed to do as he lifted off. As they took me off the bird, I saw even more blood. It didn't take long to get more in me, though. They radioed ahead and got the blood type from my dog tags. The only vein available in those seconds was on my neck. The doc stuck the needle in as we were rolling towards the ER. I felt that cold blood reach my heart and spread throughout my body. Weird feeling. I stayed awake throughout the entire ordeal, in the ER and pre-op. I thought I was going to die. All that blood on the deck of my boat, on the Hilo, and now on the floor. I actually said, "I'm gonna die," a few times. I thought of my daughter. She was 13 months old and would never remember me. That was my last thought as they put me under. I did not expect to wake up. Sometimes I do wake up and wonder if it was all a dream. Then I move. No, not a dream. It still hurts. Every family has their secrets, and ours was that Yia was a bit crazy. One could point to her sudden and animated outbursts of anger in awkward places, her decades of pill popping that made her loopy and fall over. There was her seemingly random religious proclamations, her lifelong gambling obsession, her propensity to nick items from stores without paying for them, and sometimes getting caught. It became the inside joke of our family. Whenever a new incident happened and the word of it spread amongst our family, there was an ashamed amusement over it. A laugh and sort of exasperated "that's yeah." It could reach boiling points sometimes, like when we would receive calls from the police because she was acting irate in a store, or cursing at family members because they disagreed with her assertion of events. In my high school history class, I had to do an assignment which just about every American high school kid must do at one time or another. You interview a relative about their life. The idea is to glean what it was like to be alive during historical events we all lived through. I decided to interview Yia. I had always known she grew up in Greece. I had known she lived there throughout the Second World War. I knew she came to America by way of meeting and marrying my grandfather, an American GI in Europe. This assignment brought new aspects of her life to light. She recalled being in a field and watching German and Bulgarian soldiers march into her town. She recalled seeing her neighbor executed in the street by Bulgarian soldiers. She told me about watching her mother eat sawdust and breadcrumbs mixed with vinegar during the Greek famine, and Jewish neighbors disappearing. She recalled hurrying home one night during the war, as she was out past the curfew, and being stopped by Bulgarian soldiers at a checkpoint. She relayed how they threatened her life, and she was only saved because a passing German officer put a stop to what these Bulgarians were doing, believe it or not. It took me decades to realize and wonder if there was more to that specific story that she didn't say. In the context of a war in which literally millions of women were violently assaulted by soldiers of armies traversing and occupying their towns. Not all of her stories were her being a victim, though. Some were defiant, maybe even heroic. She told me about how she beat up the wife of the commanding Bulgarian general in charge of the occupation of her town and had to hide for days as soldiers searched for her. She told me about being rounded up with other women in her town, being put onto trucks and driven into the mountains. She survived to tell me the story by jumping out of the truck while it was driving and hiding in the mountains for a period of time. Yia was born in 1923. Greece was invaded in 1941. She endured these catastrophic events as she was coming into womanhood. More forgotten to those outside of Greece, however, was that Greece also had a brutal civil war that began when the Axis occupation ended and didn't end until 1949. It's often considered the first proxy war of the Cold War. Yia really had her youth robbed by the brutality of war. My own experience with war came when I was 20. I was sent to Afghanistan as an infantryman. and saw war through that lens. I had to fight for my life on numerous occasions. I had close brushes with death. I watched an 18-year-old friend take his last breath with his head in my lap as we sat in a field. I put 2 other friends into their body bags as well. I saw civilians caught in the middle of it all. Many stories too intimate, still too fresh to tell, even to those that I am closest to. Of course, I've also lost many friends to self-unaliving since. If surviving war was one journey, coming home is another. Coming home is really the journey of recovering from it. It's a process, not an event. For many, it can be a journey that never ends. A decade plus removed from my service overseas, I've been better able to put much into perspective. I've started to realize the similarities between Yia and me. Replace pills with various other substances, especially marijuana. Searching for spirituality in different places. The violent and random outbursts of anger that terrified family members. This is how we carry it. The trauma, the guilt, the frustration. It isn't pretty or neat or easy to explain. How can one even begin to explain it all? Especially to those who have no concept of what it's like to live through something like war. Yia passed away in 2015. I didn't realize most of what I just said until after she passed away. I'm not sure how I could have used this knowledge while she was alive. I do think that I could have been more patient with her. Maybe I could have listened to her more about her life. Maybe about what she saw. I think these, because it's what I often wish for those around me. I feel a camaraderie with Yia now, an understanding. In a way, it now feels how we spoke about her, is how we speak about me. How she acted was inexplicable to many in our family. But me, I get it. This was the story that my dad and grandfather told me the day that I graduated basic training. As I understand it, my grandfather was a Vietnam vet attached to a Florida National Guard unit. My dad started his Army career in 1982 to the same unit. While it's uncommon for family members to be in the same unit, it's not unheard of, and it's much easier for it to occur in the National Guard because those jobs are all based on availability and limited slots. During one weekend, they were doing live fire exercises. This particular exercise focused on 2 separate teams attacking 2 separate enemy bunkers. The first team was my grandfather's, and they were tasked with clearing out the bunker. The second team was my dad's, tasked with live firing an M60 into the second bunker. My dad was the gunner. On my dad's team was a private, and he was in charge of scouting the enemy bunker with binoculars and giving my dad the okay to fire. The problem was that the wrong bunker was scouted, and when he gave my dad the okay, my grandpa's team was simultaneously storming the same bunker. So my grandfather had just cleared the bunker and was suddenly in a hail of 7.62mm rounds coming for him. And that's how my dad almost killed my grandfather. I think about this incident every year right about this time in the Christmas season. It was a true event, and I think about it a lot when I see people stressed out about the season or their plight. The incident always serves to remind me about the true meaning of Christmas, to be grateful for the things you have, and as a reminder of no matter how bad things might be for you, there is always someone else who would give anything to be in your shoes. In the Coast Guard, it's just about every coastie's dream to be stationed at a coastal rescue station at some point in their career. The rescue stations are in some ways like your local fire department, but in place of firemen and fire engines, there are coasties and rescue boats. It was late December in 1989, and I was a seaman, E3, at Station Checto River, located in Brookings, Oregon. The small harbor in Brookings is home to a number of pleasure craft, a number of small to mid-sized commercial fishing boats, hobbyists really, and a small number of large, serious commercial fishing boats. By 1989 to 1990, the economy wasn't doing so well, and a number of people were having hard times. The crew of one of the large, Sirius fishing boats decided to go fishing over the Christmas holiday to earn some much-needed extra money. Early on Christmas Day, we received a radio call from the USCGC Citrus that she had picked up some survivors of a sinking. They were the survivors from the commercial fishing boat from Brookings that had gone to sea the evening of the day before Christmas Eve. The USCGC Citrus was too large to enter the harbor, and so the station dispatched a 44-foot motor lifeboat to rendezvous with the Citrus and take the survivors back to the station and then on to their families. The survivor debrief I sat in on was not a regular member of the crew. He was a regular member of another commercial fishing boat. However, that particular boat was not going out fishing in the near future. Our survivor was invited by the captain and his crew as a favor, as he was in hard financial times and his boat was not fishing. Fishing communities are tight-knit communities and try to help each other out when possible. During the debrief, the survivor talked about how he and his wife had a big argument about him going out to fish during the Christmas holiday. He wanted to earn money so there would be gifts for the family and to pay bills. His wife thought it was more important for him to be with his family during the holiday. To the dismay of his wife, he prevailed and went out to sea to fish. The survivor recounted that it was about 2:00 a.m. on Christmas Day, and all hands were on deck hauling in crab pots. The boat suddenly and unexpectedly began to heel hard over to port and began taking on water. The boat rolled over and sank so quickly that there was just enough time for the crew to scramble into their immersion suits and get over the side. There was not enough time to radio a distress call, and the fishing boat was not equipped with an emergency position radio indicating beacon. They were only on the second evening of a scheduled 5-day fishing trip. No one would notice that they were missing for at least 3 days. As the crew was floating in the water, the survivor recounted that they all knew they were in a life and death situation, and things were not looking good. He further recounted what he would not give to at that moment be at home at the kitchen table, arguing with his wife about going out fishing and not fighting for his life. The water temperature of the Pacific Ocean near Oregon in December hovers between 45 degrees Fahrenheit and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A person in those water temperatures without a life jacket will last only about 9 minutes before becoming unconscious, and with a life jacket about 15 minutes before becoming unconscious. In both cases, a person can only last 1 to 3 hours before dying of hypothermia. Not long after sunrise, a seaman apprentice, E2, on lookout from the USCGC Citrus, spotted the survivors in the water. The lookout was just 2 weeks out of basic training. Normally, people who come fresh out of basic training are immediately assigned to a month of mess duty in the galley, washing dishes and swabbing the mess deck. Due to the duty rotation of mess cooks, the seaman apprentice was instead placed on lookout duty roster. BZ kid, this is what the Coast Guard is really about. After the debrief, our survivors were taken home by family members, and so ends our story, gentle readers, but not the lesson. So if you're stressed by the holiday or saddened by life, just remember this story, a real story, and remember to be grateful for what you have. On an FTX in South Korea, spring of 1990, the lieutenant decides that he wants us driving the APCs and Vulcans with our hatches down, using the glass periscope things that surround the hatch area, so we can practice driving the way we would in a real combat situation. Which, by the way, I didn't do once in Desert Storm. We only lowered the hatch if the gunner needed to fire. The problem is, and we told him, the glass is older than Jesus. It's orange with age, cracked, etc. We can't see a thing. Finally, his compromise was to just do the best we can and have our team chiefs poke their heads up and direct you. He also wanted them to stay as low as possible. You know, snipers. Okay then. FTXs are filled with a lot of pretend stuff, but this was another level of stupid to me. Being a high-speed soldier NCO wannabe, I shut up and do my job. It's hard for me to see though, and my team chief is having a difficult time directing me without poking his head all the way up out of his hatch. About an hour into this, we come to a very steep hillside road, and the convoy begins to climb it. We get to the top, then start to go down. As I crest the hill and start down, I see the convoy stopped in front of me. The road was muddy enough for melted snow. We had a hard time stopping. I slid for 15 feet or so. I missed hitting the APC in front of me by a foot or so when he stopped suddenly. The whole column was stopped, on a hill. I later found out it was because the lieutenant was lost. He stopped to look at his map and the terrain. He was at the front of the column, which was now located at the bottom of the trail on the other side of the hill, so the entire battery was stopped on this muddy trail. A second later, the Vulcan behind us crests the hill, sees my APC stopped, but can't stop in time. He slides and hits us, which pushes the nose of my APC towards the edge of the road, which is currently over a 50-foot drop to the bottom. How we didn't go over the hill, I'll never know. Momentum is conserved in a system, and we probably should have. I guess he didn't hit us very hard, just enough to give me a good scare. He still moved us a good 5 feet though. One of the Cat USAs was driving, and he was horrified that he almost killed us. Cat USAs were Korean soldiers who lived and worked with Americans instead of being in the ROK military. It was better pay and conditions for them. He kept apologizing after it was all over, thinking I was mad at him. Poor guy. He was one of the better ones we had. I went ballistic about the LT. This idea almost got me and my team chief killed. I jumped out, ripped off my helmet and yelled, "Where is he?" and went running to the front of the formation. Just as I get within choking distance of the O1, our platoon daddy, who was helping him orient the map and figure out where we were, grabs me and slams me to the ground. He won't let me up until I've chilled. The O1 is all like, "What is wrong with him?" I unleash a string of cussing that the world has rarely seen directed at him, along with many threats of bodily harm. Long story short, some NCO convinced him that I was just shaken up from the near miss, and that it was a bad idea. He suddenly changed course and let us drive with hatches up, so we could see until the new glass came in, so that we could drive safely. I'll be the first to admit, it wasn't the smartest thing in the world, but that O1 was transferred to another battery about a month later, so he must have made someone angry. The entire year I was there, we never did get new glass. Go figure. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Also, I want to thank every man and woman in uniform that fights for this country. Thank you all for your service. And to everyone, have an excellent night, and I'll read to you in the next video. Good night, everybody.